We'll start by starting the introduction. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Today we have Professor Saman Halgamuge, and he is a professor in the School of Electrical Mechanical Infrastructure Engineering at University of Melbourne, and he's the fellow of IEEE, IET, and AAIA, which I think stands for Asia Pacific AI Association, and he has been served as a distinguished lecturer speaker of IEEE, director and head of research for a School of Engineering at ANU University, a member of Australian Research Council College of Experts, the founding director of the PhD Training Center in Melbourne, India, postgraduate program MIPP at University of Melbourne, and associate dean and assistant dean in international engagement in the Melbourne School of Engineering. And he has done lots of applicable work in different area of engineering using AI and optimization, and he's going to touch them here today and talking about socially responsible AI as well. So thanks, Saman, again to accepting the invitation. We're waiting for your presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Hari, for very generous introduction. I just go and try to share my presentation.
My pleasure.
Hope you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It sounds interesting. Let's see. The content is also interesting to you. So this is slightly different to my usual presentation because it's a relatively new project that I have been working on, focusing on disadvantaged communities. That is about 2 years old. And so we are making some very interesting progress that I would like to share with you. Okay, so we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people and Kulin Nation on which I work, and pay respect to their elders and past and present and families. So part of the work we are doing also from a community called Tati Tati community. And as we go, I'll talk a bit more about it. All right, so this is the brief outline. So I plan to talk for about 50 minutes max, and maybe I'll stop slightly earlier. So first I talk about the issues I mentioned, the regularization and accessibility, the two major themes, and that lead to the development of what I call fair AI or social responsible AI. And then I see there's opportunities in multiple areas. And then I talk about the specific projects that we do supporting disadvantaged communities, particularly looking at water rights and AI, project involving indigenous communities, and then AI for rural electrification in the developing world, focusing on Africa. And there are a few other slides talking about probably about 90% of my work is on these other AI applications in my lab slides, but the focus here is about 10% of the work that I'm so excited about to present to you. So let me start with saying this is my personal view and of what will be the 21st century AI. I mean, what should it look like? What type of AI future we do not want? And we clearly do not want AI that is secretive, that cannot explain its action. And we don't want AI that discriminates any of us. And we do not want to have AI that cannot learn, cannot get better continuously. And of course, we do not want AI to harm humans and the world. And we do not want AI that is elite. So, but I mean, by that is we do want AI to be democratized. Now there's a question here. So how can you democratize AI if it can be misused? Just like any other technology. So AI can be misused, of course. So the AI must be regulated. So that is the answer. There are some really nice efforts happening in Australia, as well as in European Union, which is perhaps far ahead of us. And the Artificial Intelligence Act, for example. And no, when you talk about regulation, then as AI researchers, you might ask this question: you cannot regulate what you cannot understand. Well, that sounds intriguing. So you call AI experts, then you should understand AI. Yes, it's only partially true. So you cannot democratize technology without having a regulatory framework to protect it from being misused. So all these things are true. So this slide should be now clear. So ability to interpret the internal intelligence captured in machine learning systems, AI systems like neural networks, is important. It's a key that will enable us to regulate AI. Again, this is my view. And if we can regulate AI, then that would be enormously beneficial, because then we can democratize AI. So how do we get everyone to access AI freely? So the two questions on the two sides, two left and right here, is one is ability to interpret internal intelligence on the left, and on the right is the ability to democratize. So now this slide I've taken from Patricia Orsa's really nice article, and which says that AI cannot stay as an elite technology. It should benefit all people, and I fully agree. So that is the democratization I'm talking about. So she even talks about no-code AI. Sounds fantastic if we can actually make it happen. So the idea is a farmer in Queensland should be able to use AI without being an AI expert, right? Just like we use a calculator. We don't know how the calculator is made, the electronics inside it. We don't need to have an idea, but we can use a calculator. So this is the future of 21st century AI, I see. So maybe I'll go a tiny bit more technical into this. So if you look at this slide, this purple dot here is most conventional AI, black box AI. And if you're in AI area, so you can imagine a traditional neural network or deep neural network that can be trained on data, and then the knowledge that it captures as a way it's usually not interpretable. So this is this purple dot. So if you see this arrow, which I call a y-axis, is the axis that has some form of interpretation. And in the low-level interpretation, I call it low-level because we have projects, a lot of people working on that, and to interpret this knowledge captured in machine learning as a mathematical model. So this is fantastic because we can actually create a model-based interpretation and domain-specific. So maybe it is in a chemistry or physics. So AI integrated with mathematical model is an active research area. So I call it low-level interpretation. That's very nice. So you can interpret the knowledge, but understood by scientists and only part of our community. Then I call this a high-level interpretation, and it is an interpretation of this knowledge in AI in language, a linguistic interpretation or partial semantic interpretation. That is quite nice because then people can actually understand it. The lawyers can look at it and see whether it discriminates someone, whether it is compliant with the law. And therefore, it is quite important from my perspective that AI, 21st century AI, the new AI, is interpretable in some form. And now you may wonder, so I drew a y-axis, the green arrow heading towards up. So what about the x-axis? Yes, there is one. So that is the axis that I call the democratization axis or accessibility of AI. So I start again with this purple dot, manually created AI. And that is the traditional, the current status. So we go and design our AI networks, so especially if you think about machine learning models, and we go and develop them. And you have to be some sort of an expert to do that. You don't have to be a super expert. So people with some knowledge can generate that, but I would like this to be improved. I would like AI to be generated automatically. There are already one very popular branch of machine learning, and so I call it neural architecture search. There are a few different names for that. So you create a neural network model, for example, automatically. So there are other names for it. So, and that is a search. So you have number of potential models and you pick the best one. So that is known as NAS and very active research area. And then there is another second method that I have been following for a very long period of time to do similar things. And I call it discover AI by automatically generating. So through evolution, as the right-hand side figure shows you. Maybe I will allude to this a little bit more in detail. So neural architecture search is nice, and it will do the job for you. And so increasing the accessibility, that means anyone can potentially generate the neural network or machine learning model needed for a given application. But computationally, that can be quite expensive because you have to search through several architectures. There are techniques developed by researchers to cut down on this computational time. And the second technique that we are quite focusing on a lot at the moment and in the past as well is automatically generating a machine learning model. So the advantage here we see is you can start with a very small model. If your data set that you have access to is small, you do not need to grow this neural network. If you consider this as a brain, so you start with a small brain, and if it can solve your problem, you don't have to grow, but you grow slowly, and it stops growing when it can solve your problem. So similarly, this neural network grow and it can become large enough to suit your complexity. So this class of neural network generation and can be computationally better, and so because it is not a search, it happens through learning, and obviously some heuristics involved in it as well. So it's incrementally learning to come up with a suitable machine learning model. So now I drew the y-axis and x-axis. So how about putting them together? So this is what I call social responsible AI, because it serves these both needs. On y-axis, it has interpretability. On x-axis, it has the accessibility. That means democratization. So this yellow box is the core AI work we have been doing in my lab for since my PhD. So in fact, my PhD is a dot in this yellow box. There's quite a lot of work to be done. There are different names at different times: explainable AI, neural architecture search, and so on and so on. But the actual work we have been doing, core AI work, is in this yellow box. So now going into talk about the application of the social responsible AI, focusing on disadvantaged groups. So this is a slide created by my postdoc, Dr. Manisha Pereira, and she has received a Google Award 2 years ago to look into discrimination in AI, the gender discrimination in particular. So she gave me a couple of slides, which I will show you. So she created this picture from the text to image generation, successful startup and entrepreneur. So what do you get here? So it tells you everything, all right? So, and then she created another image using the text pretty lady. So this is what you get. So we have created lots of material in this area with the support of the Google grant, and some of these are available on public domain. And now focusing on disadvantaged communities and minorities, we currently have 3 major projects and supported by 2 internal grants, one from Social Equity Institute and one from Faculty of Engineering and IT, but also through our ALCTP on democratization of machine learning. Okay, so where do we see major opportunities, or where are the people mostly affected? Quite a lot of areas, and one example is law enforcement that you can see, and the other one is healthcare. And the energy is a project particularly in developing countries that and also in remote communities that we are focusing on. Okay, so the first project, application project, is led by 2 postdocs that I share with ABP, the School of Design. And that is to look at AI applications for Indigenous people around the world, not just in Australia. So because we believe that there are things that you can learn from these applications. And this is actually sizable community. If you look at throughout the world, there are about 476 million Indigenous people living in 90 countries across the world. That is 6.2% of global population. And the word indigenous also has different, it has different other names as well. So yesterday I was in Thailand at a conference, and so they have a different name for it. So everyone has it. So most countries have it, but my apologies if you don't see all the countries, because it's very much US, Australian focused map here. And you can see these green areas where the Indigenous people are, but this is not complete, because I know India has Indigenous people. Sri Lanka, where I was born, has Indigenous people, and many other countries have them. Okay, so so the second project I'm going to talk about is also on Indigenous people, and that is focused on water rights of Tati Tati community. Okay, so and the Indigenous people throughout the world are affected, obviously, by colonization and resulting in the loss of their traditional lands, culture, language, and knowledge systems. And it's a quite complex. If you look at different communities, you can see similarities, as I mentioned, but you can also see stark differences. So in Australia, Indigenous Australians are 2 to 3 times worse off in social and economic disadvantage than non-Indigenous Australians. And you can see this very clearly on poor health, high arrest rates, inadequate housing. And it's also quite sad, in my view, that non-Indigenous Australians, there are not enough non-Indigenous Australians who are actually looking into research in this area. And I think it's responsibility of all of us to look into this community. So Manisha leads research work, and which will have an output as a research paper that we will be putting into archive for sure. And so this is looking at these indigenous communities and artificial intelligence throughout the world. And this is an important structural outcome that we came up with, which will be discussed in detail in the paper, but I'll give you a brief idea. So we found there are 4 themes that are, in our view, have a lot of common areas. So one is the well-known discrimination in AI systems, because the AI system created are based on data that probably do not capture indigenous people enough, at least to the proportion of indigenous people in the country. So the discrimination in AI systems, because of the nature of the AI system, the way it is created, is one big concern. And it's not only in Australia, but throughout the world. So that is this circle here. And the second one I would like to mention here is preservation of the culture. So AI systems are used to support a preservation of knowledge. For example, Australian Indigenous people do have their knowledge transferred to oral traditions. And can we actually use the AI techniques to support that? Because when you transfer knowledge through AI oral traditions, it can get improved, and maybe some important information can be lost. And so can we actually create some form of knowledge base using AI? And the third one I would like to mention is this blue circle here. And if you talk to the community, with the community, you can identify the needs. How can AI change their life in a positive direction? So what are the challenges? How do we improve their lives in the way they want it to be improved? Obviously in consultation with them. So this is a big area. And so our second project with Indigenous communities is actually in this blue circle. And this one on the top, which I call knowledge, is actually quite interesting to me personally as well. And just like all the other projects, this is an area that we see quite a bit of potential, because it's about recognizing Indigenous knowledge, but also learning from it through AI and computation technologies. I mean, this knowledge is developed through generations and generations of experience. So I can give you an example. When I grew up in Sri Lanka, if there was a snake bite, parents will never take a child to a hospital. You might criticize that, but at the time, people know that Indigenous medicine could cure these things quite quickly. So to be on the safe side, you go to the hospital as well as you contact the Indigenous medical practitioners when it comes to snake bites. This is a society I grew up in Sri Lanka. So this knowledge cannot be completely ignored. So I would rather say this knowledge should be connected, married with the Western sciences, and they should be investigated. There should be something that is beneficial for the entire world. So if you do not ignore the Indigenous knowledge, I know that our colleagues in Floyd's told me that there are lots of research on how the boomerang works from the Floyd's perspective. So I think it's a traditional Indigenous technologies should be looked at, and also traditional Indigenous medicine, in addition to the culture and the art and so on, right? So now, interestingly, all these 4 areas, when we looked at, when we read through about over 200 papers, I believe, and there are lots of interactions as well, which is quite interesting. I'm not planning to go through this, but just to show you that we actually seriously look at these papers and all these 4 sections. So basically, it's a bottom-up review. So we read papers and then we observe there are 4 themes and they're intersecting with each other. So you can see that we looked at New Zealand, Maori papers focusing on the Maori people, and then Australian and Canadian, and that is for discrimination in AI systems, one of the circles. And for this circle on preservation of the culture, there are lots of papers coming from Peru, for example, US, South Africa, Ecuador, Canada, and also Australia. And for needs and challenges circle, also you can see quite a lot of papers. So I'm not planning to go through this, but just to show you that we capture quite a bit of diversity, and also Kenya. So it's a quite interesting thing we found in sub-Saharan Africa is called Ubuntu philosophy. I don't want to go into details, but it's very interesting to look at how this Ubuntu philosophy works. And this is the second project I mentioned, and on water rights of the Tati Tati community. And so thanks to School of Design, and we have a connection through School of Design, and we work with Indigenous Knowledge Institute, with Dr. Sangeeta, and Tati Tati community on this project. So this is funded partially by Social Equity Institute and also our Faculty of Engineering and IT. So as you know, in Australia, so Murray-Darling Basin is a very important. And even yesterday, I heard news about some of the issues associated with this Murray-Darling Basin. So, and we all know that in Australia, traditional lands and waters of the indigenous nations are unceded. So there's no treaty. So therefore, they're considered as occupying entity. But the interesting thing here is that the communities do not enjoy their rights. So here, this is the indigenous art created by our friend Brendan Kennedy from Tati Tati community. So only 0.2% of the available water entitlements are enjoyed by the indigenous communities, and the way that they create this information is using this picture. So these 2 dots among all the other dots is what they enjoy when it comes to surface water. So, and here's another drawing, similarly, that is also created by Brendan, and to indicate what are they actually enjoying from the water in the traditional lands. So this also shows you a different approach. So we may work with numbers and information that you and I may consider as quite normal, but there is another way to inform this in indigenous cultures, and so we are also learning that. Is fascinating, and how do we convert that through art and pictures. And today we also thought of looking into AI system or computation system, which can probably do this translation. Okay, so it could be quite interesting when we actually work with indigenous communities, that we do not go there with the tables and lots of numbers, and then probably, I mean, they're certainly happy to look at it, but it will be nicer if we can actually transform that into more appropriate forms of figures. And it's something we are learning on the way. So this existing injustice on water rights is not only common to these 4 jurisdictions or 4 states of the Murray-Darling Basin, but it is also commonly observed in all the other nations as well, or all the other states or other parts of Australia as well. This is another piece of art showing a vision for First Nations water. So there's some research done in that space, and there's some people working on it, and we are engaging with them in trying to create AI to support and also understand. There is a gap between understanding what the Indigenous communities are saying and what are the intentions of the non-Indigenous people. So we are also attempting to use intelligent agents to bridge this gap. So now there are a few very important principles that we are learning, and we are also adapting and learning and using. So our expertise where Indigenous peoples or organizations need our expertise we offer our expertise where it is needed. And we don't have to do that just for being an academic exercise and in a selfish way, but we want to see that there are direct benefits to their goals. And we do that in consultation with broader First Nations community. And actually, here's a picture. Rajit travels there and conduct workshop with Sangeeta and Brendan and so on in the community and in a traditional way, and get information. And this is the communication phase, and that is what we are doing right now. And so because we believe that anything we develop must be developed with them, and we also obey the ethics and code of conduct associated with working on Indigenous affairs. There's a university guidelines, there's an Australian guidelines, and we are following that and learning as well. And obviously, we won't publish anything, we won't do anything without the proper consent from the community. So our approach is to understand what matters to the people and understand their cultural and economic futures, the benefits, and benefits for all, not only for traditional owners. The benefits could be for everyone. And then we use computation modeling and AI to support cultural objectives of the Indigenous people. So those are the two projects currently on working with Indigenous communities. And this is an interesting project. It's again, about 1.5 years old and started during pandemic times, but then there was some roadblocks because we couldn't travel. Quite recently, our PhD student Will went to Kenya and Uganda and spent some time. And this is a joint project with Liz Ratnam from ANU and also Jolene de Hoek, previously from IBM. So this project is partially funded by Australian Research Council. So what we are trying to do is to understand how we can help with AI in rural electrification. So this is again a paper, an invited paper that will appear pretty soon, and Sustainable Renewable Energy Reports. I think it's Springer ANU publisher. So what we are trying to look at is microgrid electrification in developing nations, understand that, and we have a pretty good understanding of the AI applications for microgrids in general. And then we try to marry these two things and create this is one of our first things to do, and to provide an industry focused review. How do we do an industry focused review from Australia? And only way to do that would be to talk to industry, engaging in African countries and also talk to communities. So this is what Will has been doing. So we understand that there are various steps to take: social, technical, economic, as well as political considerations. And this project has been quite interesting because we are learning things, and some of these things having grown up in Sri Lanka, is slightly familiar to me, but there are also new aspects that I'm learning. So, so this is Will, and he has spoken to, I believe, about 30 companies in Uganda and Kenya, and some of them are overseas owned companies from UK and so on, but operating in Africa. And this also led to some really nice works, including a new project. So now we also work with Inline, a company, I think it is a startup coming from Berkeley, and they create sensors that are applied in Africa mainly, and understanding power grid quality. So this is sensor from Congo, or sensor data from Congo. So they collect data so that we can understand what is going on. So you can see there's quite a huge variation in the voltage, and most of the devices that we connect may not work. So it's a very challenging problem. So you have to, when you think about rural electrification in these areas, you also need to think about the electrical appliances and to be used. And there are lots of challenges. I'm not going into details, but quite exciting things to look at. So some of the interesting features where AI can contribute here. One example is non-intrusive load monitoring. So you look at the loads and try to determine what are the sort of electrical appliances being used, a kettle, the air conditioner, kettle. So this is a very simple example. You don't need a neural network to do that, but there are lots of applications. You can see CNN, SVM, and even mark models and so on. Okay, so now a particular focus that we are looking at here is the cooking, electrical cooking. So if you introduce electricity, and that will change several things. And one thing would be the way of cooking currently, with a very strong carbon emission happening in developing Africa. So for example, the 92% of the population in Uganda, even if they want to, cannot do it because have no access to do it. So, and then there are lots of challenges, and all these challenges cannot be solved just by using AI, but there is one aspect that we are going to focus on in this new project that we are hoping to start. So, and the magic word here is to use carbon credit to finance some of that. And how do we use AI potentially to support this? Okay. So, all right, I have a few more minutes. I thought that is a sign for me to stop. Okay. So, and we are working with two companies, one in UK and one in Africa. So, so this is happening right now, and we put in an application for funding. So now I go into my last 10 minutes and to talk about probably about 90% of the work we are doing, but not entire 90%, but give you some idea. So I think the best way to show that would be to show you some of the recent papers. Maybe I pick two. And this is the first one, very recently accepted. It's in computer vision and led by Tamasha, and she has joined as a postdoc recently. And we are looking at this continuous learning aspect, which I mentioned in that as a feature the 21st century AI should have. They should continually learn as we go. So now an important aspect of that is not to forget all knowledge, which we call catastrophic forgetting, and while it acquire new knowledge. Of course, I mean, we are talking about non-growing AI system here. So you have to have an AI system that can grow, ideally, with new knowledge, okay? That is a different aspect we are looking at. But in continual learning, we are trying to create methods that can continue to gain new knowledge without losing completely all knowledge, but also without storing or reusing entire old data, because that will not work, because there will be memory restrictions. You can't record data for 50 years, right? And so if an AI system is continuously developing, evolving, and you don't want to forget everything, so you need to be selective on how to forget things and how to remember things. So this paper we can't give out yet, but it's accepted, so it should be on public domain within months. I think the conference is in October, but it will be available pretty soon, I believe, on archive. So we put everything on archive and public domain, and we also put all our codes in GitHub and public domain as part of democratization that we practice inside our group as well. Okay, so the second big project that I want to mention is not one project, it's multiple, is the visualization. So it is, I think I will start with this slide and I explain that in few, I take about 2-3 minutes to do that, I believe. So imagine a continuously evolving scenario. So I go back to pandemic, right? A pandemic times, situation is happening every single day. You get new news, new information, right? So if you plot this new information in y-axis, our observation, some form of observation, and time in x-axis, then it's quite easy to create this trajectory, right? This is maybe the number of infections, y-axis, and x-axis is time. So some form of continuum, right? Y-axis could be some form of observation. So this is pretty easy for us poor humans because we can visualize 2D or 3D. Now, but imagine the situation where there are multiple Y variables, and now you have to map this into 2D or 3D so that we can actually visualize, like in the left-hand side. So this could be a situation where you have 100 sensors observing something. So 100 sensors observe these things, and over time, so you have now 100 dimensions to observe, which you can't as a human. So if you really want to observe this, this is somewhat related to explainable AI as well. And you need to map that into 2D form or 3D form to visualize. Okay, so this is a very active research area for a very long period of time. People use different methods. And we in AI machine learning have been working on this as well. So this work published in 2021 is what we call self-organized nebulous growths for robust and incremental data visualization. And we think it is an important contribution. And so I will explain this figure, the introductory figure in there. So just using the pandemic example that we can probably, understand much easier. So let's say you have data and you visualize in 2D, of course, you have to visualize it, or 3D potentially. So let's say there are 3 variants of the virus. So you can see this virus, 3 colors, 3 variances. So now that is the situation today. And tomorrow, if you're lucky, and the number of variants remain the same, we call it homogeneous increment. Of course, more people will get sick tomorrow, and then you get the same variants, okay? But it's also possible that on one day, you have a 4th variant emerging. That's this red one here, okay? So now, and that is a heterogeneous increment. So what we are talking about here is our algorithm should be able to track data continuously and identify homogeneous as well as heterogeneous increments. Of course, obviously, we need to know if there's a new variant. That is a lot more important, okay? But we should also understand if it is not the case. It's just the same like yesterday. There's nothing new, same data, just get bigger, okay? So this algorithm can do both. And we have shown it comparing whatever available at the time. And so this is just a simple toy example. So I think you might know this. It's a standard data set, minist handwritten digit data set. You can actually try this out by tricking the method to see whether you can add a new class of data, whether it can actually find out. So it's different color means new class. So you can see the colors get more and more. So because we add data that way to see whether it can actually recognize the new classes of data, as well as copy the old classes of data, the new variants as well as old variants. So that is a similar example here. And of course, we applied this on a real data, real experimental data as well, but this is an illustrative example so that you can get the point. So now, because we consider this as a significant contribution, of course, we have to use our own work. So, and we have applied this in two really big projects. And one is related to an NHMRC grant we have, and that is the integrating large high-dimensional datasets into single reference atlas, single-cell transcriptomics. Now, the interesting feature here is the x-axis you have seen, which I call continuum, some form of continuum, is not time. So it doesn't need to be time, some form of continuum. So let's say there are 100 labs doing experiments. So lab 1 could be time point 0, lab 2 could be time point 1, and so on. Lab 100 could be the time point 99, whatever. So you can create a continuum, we call it pseudo time. So you can actually create that way. So it doesn't need to be time, some sort of variable. And then many number of dimensions you mapped into 2D or 3D so that you can visualize it. So by doing so, we try to create an atlas for single cell transcriptomics and together with VHI. And on this paper, we have been writing for quite a long time, so it should be out within a few weeks. And the second paper, this is on Alzheimer data, again, large biomedical project, and the continuation of this project is funded by US Department of Defense Biomedical Research Program, and completely non-defense work we do, but they're funding it. And this is on progression of brain organoids by visualizing their electrophysiological characteristics. So I have 1 more minute. So I won't go into that, but this paper is already out and in bioRxiv. And this is a fascinating work of observing how you can create a brain organoid of a sick person. And rather than, because you can't explain, you can't apply medication on the sick person to experiment, you can actually create a brain organoid similar to the sick person's brain, and then you do all of your experiments to find out the best possible treatment strategy for that sick person. In this case, it is Alzheimer's disease. So it's a fascinating real work done in Wollongong, and in wet lab, we work with Lisanne Ovi, Professor Lisanne Ovi there, and we are using their data, and it also involves collaboration with 14 hospitals and also Australian National University. All right, this is my last slide, thanking all the fantastic people who provided us with grants. And currently I have 2 ARC discovery projects and 1 very large NHMRC grant, and also the Department of Defense Medical Research Grant. So those are the 4 large grants I have at the moment, but throughout there are so many people who provided grants. I acknowledge all of them, and also my external collaborators, our Florida Institute, Peter Mac, VHI, Academia Sinica in Taiwan, Tongji Hebei University, Oxford, Southampton, NTU Singapore, Tufts University, Canada, Cambridge, but also quite a large number of local universities, include Monash, RMIT, Wollongong, Sydney, New South Wales, and so on and so on. Thank you. That's it.